for my seat here. Welcome to session 5, and we're continuing on with benefit cost analysis. And what I'm going to do today is we're going to move into and wrestle with a determination of what constitute benefits and what constitutes costs. I've worked very, very hard to establish that within the criteria of welfare economics, or the way in which we're viewing the justification and legitimacy of government action, that I've established that there are times when government action or policy helps to stimulate improvements in the distribution of resources. And prudent government action improves the distribution of resources in society. And they take the form of a more equitable or just provision of public goods, or the generation of social surplus in the forms of consumer or producer surplus improvements, usually through the generation or the creation of a Pareto improvement in the economy. We make the economy better. We make it to a point where it cannot be made any better, but we're able to determine that it was better than it was before. In government policy making, equity is an important thing, and I want to bring up the issue of equity. We always have tension between equity and efficiency concerns. And it is not usually, when you're doing something at the government level, if something benefits one group, it often may lead to a burden on some other groups. And so oftentimes in governments, when we make a choice to benefit something, it comes at the expense of somebody else. It's that in the short run, those kinds of choices are a zero-sum game. Advantages to somebody or some space have to come at a cost to some other places. And so we worry about that in economics, and if you read benefit cost literature, there are chapters on how do you deal with this issue of adequately compensating those who lose versus those who gain. And I'm not going to go into a lot of that. I'm going to back up just a little bit. We have a heritage and a history, whether you studied economics or sociology or another type of dimension. You may remember that there are very big principles that we pay attention to. We do care about fairness, and I'll get to fairness in a minute, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. We also have an idea of what are called utilitarian principles. The notion that absent another decision-making criterion, governments should try to maximize the gain to as many people as possible. We would call that utilitarianism, the most gain for the most people. And in so doing, or implicit in doing something like that, it means that some people lose out. Well, in an ideal society, all of the gainers would be able to compensate the losers, either in the short run or in the long run, and in so compensating them, there are no gainers and losers. But that's unrealistic. The gains that I derive because of some decision by the government to invest in flood control or something, that's a redistribution of resources from around my state and around my nation, we can't possibly compensate the losers. And so we don't even try. But what we have is a notion called the Kaldor-Hicks principle when we make these kinds of improvements. And it's assumed that the gainers could, if they were made to, compensate the losers, and we would still be better off. And so it's somewhat of a stylized argument that we're going to engage in this level of government activity to benefit this group of people or this space, and it's going to make some other group of people worse off, and the beneficiaries, the recipients, are capable of compensating the losers. Well, at the societal level, at the national level, we assume that occurs eventually. but at a smaller level, I don't pay you for the benefits that I receive. You don't charge me directly for the gains that you receive at my expense. It's an indirect relationship. So we always have this issue between tension and equity. And equity means that we want, in general, in government and public policy, we want the people that pay for something to benefit from it. And that's considered equitable. We also want that if I'm using public resources, I want those efficiency. I want those resources used in the best way possible. I want to have made an efficient choice with regard to the use of my public resources. And so equity and efficiency are always going to be concerns. Efficiency has to do with the skill with which you allocate public goods, trying to achieve the maximum good for the maximum number of people. However, equity means that we're doing the right kind of good for the kind of people who need the good done for them. Now, I'll give you the example that they used in the book. When they talk about, everybody talks about equality. Equality, in the example that was in our textbook, was with that when everybody has shoes. Equity is when everyone's shoes fit, meaning the commodity suits the needs of the person that we're interested in. And so that's where we get into this idea of equity. And we take it a little bit farther, at least I tend to take it a little bit farther, in that we achieve equity by redistributing resources. Remember just a couple of steps back, and we talked about the roles of government, and one of them is its distributive role. And one of the ways in which governments redistribute resources in society is through the use of a progressive income tax that tax people at higher incomes pay a higher tax rate. They have a greater ability to pay. And so we accomplish equity by redistributing resources. Well, we do that within the tax code. We also do that on a spatial basis. We reallocate resources from wealthy areas to impoverished areas. We reallocate resources in places that have wonderful natural advantages to places that have some kinds of deficiencies in their landscape or in their water structures or who knows what. And so these types of things are engaged in because we want there to be equitable distribution of both private and public resources, but most especially private resources. So this idea then of fairness creeps in. What constitutes fairness? And you hear things in the law, the fairness doctrine, or what constitutes a fair or a reasonable choice for different types of people. Well, fairness does enter into it. Is it fair? Are we achieving, by making a decision, are we achieving the fundamental elements of what would be broadly considered a fair choice? Well, politics tells you that one group's idea of fairness absolutely may not align with another group's idea of fairness. As I'm making these lectures, we're right in this territory of healthcare reform. Healthcare reform. And I have one group in healthcare reform talking about something called a public option, where health insurance would be provided by the government. And the reason the government would provide it is because there is a market failure, because we have a large number of people who do not have access to private health insurance for a variety of reasons. And then you have another group saying a couple of things, and they think that's more fair. And it's fair because it creates an equitable solution in that a merit good, in this case healthcare access, is being distributed to a group that otherwise doesn't have it. And another group might say, well, you're interfering with the market with a public choice option where the government provides insurance, and because it's market interfering, it's going to result in some losses and or costs to the private sector, and we're not certain that this choice is going to leave us better off. It's an unfair choice, and what we need to think about is making the market work better by instituting market solutions, and they think that would be a more fair solution to this problem. In the meantime, you still have dozens of millions of Americans who don't have access to health insurance, and the solution isn't as clear. What is the fair solution? We have to work our way through that. We move fairness on just a little bit farther, though, and we move into what is the territory of a normative conclusion. Normative means that we're invoking our values, and if our value is 100% of the people in the United States should have access to health care, and that means that one way or another, the mechanisms that allow that, both in terms of individual contribution to health care plans as well as systems of access, have to be developed. That's now, we're talking about an element of justice. It's not just equity. It's not just fairness. Now we're talking about justice, and we're talking about fairness at a higher level. And so benefit cost analysis should be concerned with these normative issues. These normative considerations should be things that we should be thinking about. Is it fair? Are we creating a more just society by building a bridge in Alaska to an island that just satisfies the transportation needs of a couple of dozen people on a bridge that maybe costs hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars? Well, the justice issue rises because there's this thing called opportunity cost. What other bundle of good things could the government have done with those resources? Were those other opportunities allowed to bid for that money? And so fairness and justice are very important things, but unfortunately they're also political things. They're not the kind of thing that we have a little flip of a switch and we can determine by pushing a button or flipping a switch that something's fair in its calculation. What we do in economics and in regional sciences is we try to provide information about the equity, we try to provide information about efficiencies, and we try to provide information about accumulating benefits to society so that we inform this normative decision-making process, that we give decision makers the tools to determine whether they're making just choices and fair choices and effective choices and efficient choices and ultimately beneficial choices. So that's the goal behind what we're doing. It's not just building a bridge. It's about improving opportunities for people, whether we enhance the market or we enhance access to public goods. So let's isolate benefits and costs. And this is a very important thing, and I'm going to emphasize this right off the bat. The costs, the word cost, only applies to the public's costs. In general, we're talking about what the government must pay. So it's always, I want you to drill this into your brains, it's the government's costs. When we do benefit cost analysis, it's benefits and government costs. So costs are government costs. Generally speaking, the costs of a project or a program include, if needed, all land acquisition, all capital. Everything that's built, every piece of equipment that's installed is capital. All equipment, all research preparatory to developing a project or ongoing research, and labor needed to construct, to implement, and to maintain on an ongoing basis a program or a project, to include periodic evaluation of the worth of the project, because that should be considered part of its cost, and then later on, if it's a capital investment like a road or a bridge or a building, the value of decommissioning. We might call that the salvage value, but that there's costs to not doing something anymore. And those are all of the costs that we consider. And there's more, but these are the big ones. Governments don't pay for things on a cash basis. They also borrow money. So we also need to also remember that we borrow money, that there's borrowing costs associated with some of our decisions. So if to fund a project, we had to borrow money, and because we had to borrow money, we had to pay interest costs, then we'd also count those costs as well, include the administration of borrowing the money. So that's what the costs are. The costs that are borne by government in the name of the citizenry. Those are the costs. Do not confuse private losses with costs. Now, remember, let's say I'm going to make a new road. And to make the new road, I'm going to go right through the middle of a whole bunch of farmers' land. Okay? So the cost of that project, one of the costs of that project is the state of Iowa or the state of Nevada or the state of Wyoming condemning that land for public use and then compensating all of the landowners. That's a cost. Now, the losses that the farmers realize, or the ranchers, because they can't use that land to make a living anymore because it's a highway, those aren't costs. Those are what I will call negative benefits. They are offsets to the benefits that we might receive from having a highway. So don't confuse losses to the private sector like that as costs. They're not. Costs are government costs. So this is very important. Remember that. Okay, so now we know costs. Costs are no big problem. The problem with benefits is that there's lots of nuance about benefits. And so we kind of have to work our way through some of the language of benefits and get a good sense of what they are. We are generally concerned with real benefits. Remember when I talked about inflation adjusting numbers, and that sometimes things were considered nominal versus real? Well, I'm kind of using that same, if you've adjusted for inflation, if you've declared a benefit to have a value in the market within the current period, then it's a real benefit. So real benefits are determined by the final consumers of the project. Okay, so a real benefit is realized by consumers, citizens, or it might be businesses. But if they're the final consumers of that project, those are real benefits. And again, they reflect an addition to the community's net welfare. And remember, I defined net welfare enhancement in the case of producing or enhancing producer surplus or ultimately consumer surplus. We've made it so that people are better off economically as a consequence. So those are my real benefits. Now we get I love this word, pecuniary benefits and pecuniary costs, but let's just pay attention to pecuniary benefits. And they come about as the economy adjusts to my decision. Let's say I put a road in a place that didn't have a road, and along that road I had interchanges. Well, because that road now has access to that land bordering that road, let's say it's going out of a community, now has access to transportation services, it makes that land along that roadway more valuable because of the increase in the access. If you have land and you have transportation access, it increases the number of things that can be done with that land, and therefore it increases its value. However, if I make a decision and I improve a roadway, let's say going out of one part of my community, and by improving that roadway, I enhance the value of land on either side of that roadway, it has to follow that in the short run, all of the other land is worth a little bit less in the community because it's still currently a zero-sum gain. The gains in one region have to come on a relatively constrained market. If somebody's bidding more for my land out here now, it has to be that they're bidding less for all the other land everywhere else. So that's why it's a pecuniary gain. It's a gain that offsets over time as the markets adjust. There was no change in the value of the economy. The gains to the improved land come at the expense of losses to the lands that were not benefited by the new road. So you see this relationship between who benefited and who indirectly or on a pecuniary basis lost. The value of my holdings went down just because we improved the land. Well, you might not notice it, but it's something that exists. We pay attention to real benefits, so that's what we're going to focus on when we do this. Now, we want to pay attention to the many different kinds of benefits, and these four categories, and you're going to get this, it's not going to be hard, but we think in terms of benefits being direct or indirect. Now, direct benefits relate closely to the project or the program's objectives. If I have a program to reduce smoking, then the direct benefit is going to be the reduction in smoking activity, because that's what the program is designed to do. I'm reducing cigarette smoking activity. An indirect benefit is that I may become healthier. I may become more athletically active. I may cough less. I may smell better. There are all kinds of indirect benefits. We tend to pay attention to both types, but we really look at direct and indirect benefits distinctly. We want to separate them out. We want to know which benefits were closely tied to the program of the project, and then which other benefits are there out there that we get to take credit for, that follow. Okay. Tangible versus intangible benefits. Tangible benefits are those that can be valued in the market, that in one form or another there is an ability for me to measure these benefits. I'm going to do it a different way. Let's say I improve a bridge so that twice as much traffic can flow on a daily basis, but especially during rush hours. Twice as much traffic. Now, what are the tangible benefits? The straight-up tangible benefits are the value of my time, which is tangible. It's bid for in the marketplace as labor, or as the value of my leisure. A tangible benefit is a reduction in travel time, which lowers businesses' costs or my commuting costs, or lowers my aggregate or average operation costs of my automobile. Those are all tangible types of benefits, things that I can measure in the workforce. And if the roadway is now safer and we have fewer accidents, well, then the reduction in accidents, collisions, and casualties are also tangible. They're valued in the market. We know how to value those things. But we have intangible benefits, and those are things that aren't as easily valued in the market, although many over time we struggle with, or we work very, very hard to come up with. Social goods and social costs, but social goods, we have they're intangibles oftentimes because we don't trade them. Cleaner air, or less congestion, or a tangible benefit of a less stressful commute. These are things that it's very, very hard to measure this kind of thing. And so it's an intangible benefit. Actions that we take that benefit the soil, air, or water, that we all can take part in, but we don't trade increments and improvements in the market. And so I can't put a dollar value on that. Well, when I'm calculating my benefits on a benefit cost analysis, I accumulate the market-traded tangible benefit values. I accumulate those, and they're part of my calculation. Part of my entire package of decision-making are to be able to sum the intangible benefits, and if there are some out there, intangible costs. But we want to make sure we pay attention to the intangible benefits. Next, we have intermediate real benefits versus final real benefits. This also goes back, you remember when we were learning about industrial accounts and we had inputs. When we think in terms of an industry producing something, it requires what are called intermediate inputs. It buys electricity, it buys raw materials, it buys services and technologies, and it uses those inputs to produce a product that might still go to another factory and serve as an intermediate input, might go to a business and allow them to provide goods or services to people, or it might go to a household, a consumer, a final consumer. Okay? So intermediate goods are used to produce something else, and final goods have found the last home that they're going to be. So electricity that's generated from a dam, a flood control project, an electrification project, the electricity that's generated, it's all electricity, but some of it is an intermediate benefit in that it flows into the productive process, and some of it is at a final benefit in that it flows to my house and it lights a light bulb, and there is no commercial value beyond that light. It's finally consumed in my home because it provides a happiness to me because I love to be able to see at night. So that's the difference between an intermediate input, intermediate into production, versus final, the final user, the last user of a commodity. Well, we want to sort these out. And make sure that we understand the difference between understanding the benefits in terms of where they're flowing, in terms of final versus intermediate, allows us to determine whether households are primarily benefiting, and or institutions and governments, they're also final consumers, or whether commerce in general is primarily benefiting. Remember I talked about the Mississippi dams, locks, and bridges. The Mississippi dam, locks, and bridges improvements, even though they fail miserably on the benefit cost analysis that every reasonable person has tried to do with them, the benefits that are identified are nearly primarily intermediate benefits, in that they have something to do with the costs of production, the costs of shipping grain, the costs of shipping all commodities up and down the Mississippi River, whether it's potash or other kinds of minerals, or whether it's great big long windmill blades that are produced in Tennessee and shipped up the Mississippi River and offloaded in Burlington. Whatever it was, that the beneficiaries are intermediate beneficiaries. There's really not that many final beneficiaries on a real benefits basis. Last, we want to pay attention to the benefits and determine whether they're inside what's considered my benefited area, or do some of them leak out? Do they spill away? Those benefits that are captured within an intentional or a design benefited region, like flood control, we want to be able to define that. Well, we know that there's a primary flood control area, and then we know that there are secondary flood control areas. That by engaging in flood control upriver, you protect the land, lower lying lands down below the flood, but you also provide, and that there's a primary damage area from floods, but you also provide a benefit outside of that primary area in that you stabilize the flow of water. And so we determine a benefit that's inside the primary beneficial territory is spatially defined, and we know the configured, and benefits that spill out, on the case of a dam, elsewhere. And so we pay attention to the territory within which the benefits are being identified. Now, this is an important thing because we have to identify our territory properly. if I do something in a small area, but I say the nation benefited from it, and therefore I start accumulating beneficial calculations for the entire population, I'm cheating. Because if my project is truly only designed to serve people from a limited territory, then I have no business making my territory so big as to inflate my potential beneficiaries. So we really do have to pay attention to the benefits that are accumulating to whom they're supposed to accumulate versus those benefits that might spill out or leak. I'm going to give you an academic example, and this will just take a second. We have at the national level a research and development tax credit that's designed to promote businesses engaging in research and development. The reason we provide this tax credit is that the market will provide an inadequate, this is according to theory, provides an inadequate supply of research and development activities in the commercial sector because they can't capture the full economic value of ideas, of research, of that activity. Some of it leaks out. Some of it spills over. All of the research that I do in creating a product, I cannot capture it completely without some of it spilling over into some other businesses or other territories or benefiting other kinds of people. And because I can't capture it, I'm not compensated for my activity. So sometimes that activity spills out, and we have a market problem that we cannot solve without some kind of public intervention. So the argument is that the government is providing a benefit by subsidizing research that increases the level of research that businesses do, that has a very intangible and spillover benefit in many different ways in society that improve our well-being, all kinds of different things. Well, I can't capture that inside a small territory. By its definition, it spills out and it leaks. So defining the territory of something like that is really goofy. It's even goofy to try to define it as a United States benefit, because good ideas in the United States migrate immediately to other countries. And good ideas in China, or good ideas in Europe, or good ideas in Bolivia, they migrate very, very rapidly. We can't contain them. And so we have to pay attention. Here's an example. Here's a project. I talked about this project where they wanted to develop a recreation area, and I'll show you later on projects that I like. Don't think that I hate everything. But in this project, what we had was, well, I'm going to change my thing here to pointer so I can write all over this, felt tip pen. What we had was a project that was going to go in an area like this. So it was a little bitty project, a little bitty, an area that was 6 square miles. Actually, it's closer to 10 square miles of land area that they were going to put a recreational lake in. Now, in so doing, they defined the potential benefited territory surrounding it to be 75 miles, which just magically captured the metropolitan communities of Lincoln, Nebraska, and St. Joseph, Missouri, and of course within that we also have Omaha. It's not listed here, but they've defined their territory, and so the benefits area has been defined very, very, very well. But in accumulating the potential beneficiaries when they did this project, they actually went out 75 miles farther out from those places, saying that they had some semblance of research that indicated to them that the people that lived as many as 150 miles away would have some kind of propensity to consider using this little bitty lake for recreation or hiking or bird seeking, given all of the choices that those people have in all of these areas. Well, they were trying to grab a bunch of outside potential benefits and cram them into the inside. They very well may have over-described the inside territory as well. And so when I'm talking about the inside, I'm talking about the area, the primary benefited area, the area that's expected to be the primary users. And then maybe this is the secondary, but still primary and still inside area, but it has a much lower probability of using that interior resource because distance diminishes our likelihood, we learned that about commuting, our likelihood of going to do anything. So we really do have to pay attention to insides and outsides and primary areas and secondary areas. Let's go through an example, and I'm going to, here, let me read this. This happened just a couple of days ago. June 22nd, 2009, President Obama signs the FDA tobacco bill. In a Rose Garden ceremony, President Barack Obama today signed a bill giving the FDA the authority to regulate tobacco. The FDA, which heretofore could not regulate tobacco, is now going to regulate tobacco. The FDA is the Food and Drug Administration. The new law gives the FDA regulatory control over tobacco products, so they've got some sort of regulation. Remember, that's a role of government. That's what we use to monitor or to limit externalities. So they have regulatory control, but it doesn't permit the agency to ban tobacco sales. Well, we know that using tobacco is deadly, so they can't ban it, so they're still allowing a deadly act to happen. Nor does it allow the FDA to limit the nicotine content, which is the addictive part of tobacco, which makes us smoke it and then makes us die. And I'm going to be a little crabby because I'm an ex-smoker, and it took me a lot of years to learn how to not smoke. And then it has some limits. It's going to limit the sale of new, safer tobacco products. It's going to ban the manufacture of or the use of terms like light, low, or mild in the manufacturing. And it's going to require more prominent warnings. And so you can see that they are trying to address some public health concerns. Senator Kennedy said it's a life-saving act. Well, that's to be proven. Somebody else said it's a historic moment. And somebody else said the bill should have a significant impact on reducing the widespread death and disease caused by tobacco use. Now, this is the kind of thing that we can try to measure. Do the benefits of regulation exceed the cost? Well, this is a reasonably low-cost regulation that's constraining what the industry can do, bringing them within a certain set of guidelines, but it's not eliminating tobacco. It's not doing anything other than that. And the idea is that by not letting them target children for their marketing, that might lower the incidence of addiction among children. By not letting them put flavorings in, which obviously targets children or people that are, yes. And by putting up bigger warnings on the cartons that you send a stronger message of the health risks. Well, that's all important, and we know information is important in making a choice. What we have a problem with is that information in relationship to addiction sometimes doesn't work very well. But imagine that we eliminated all tobacco. If I got my thing up here, we're going to cross out all tobacco, and we're going to get rid of it. So what are going to be some of the costs? Let me get my pointer back here and get my pointer and have my pointer. So let's assume we had a legislative conclusion that tobacco, it needs to be a controlled substance because it's dangerous, and that there are only limited legal uses. Let's imagine that there's medicinal poultices that tobacco can be used for, but the manufacturing of smoking, chew, or snuff products would no longer be legal, as also would be the distribution of the raw product to other than approved buyers. So we're treating it like a controlled substance. So what are the costs? Remember, the costs are the government's costs. They're the regulation and compliance costs, but we have some other costs that we've enjoyed over the years. We tax the heck out of tobacco. So what we would lose in doing this would be a revenue stream that we used to get and we still get from tobacco. But do we consider cost compensation to the private sector? Would that be considered a cost? Yes or no? And why? Well, I already told you that private losses are not automatically costs. But if in part of this what we do is a buyout program where we buy out the farmers and we give them some sort of nominal payment in lieu of in the future producing tobacco, well, that counts as a cost. But their inability, the income loss of producing tobacco that accumulate to the tobacco farmer, that's not a cost. That's a negative benefit on their side. So let's go through a few of these. So the benefits. Well, on the minus side, we have the losses to the producers. Those are the tobacco farmers, and the manufacturers, where the big money gets made, and the distributors. What else might be some losses, that are associated with it? Well, these are the big ones. Negative benefit. Can you think of a personal benefit to smoking? Maybe you might think that by smoking it keeps you from gaining weight. And because if you smoke periodically, it diminishes your appetite. And so you think of it as a weight limiting mechanism. Well, okay, we can call that a minus benefit or a negative benefit as well. But on the benefits, we're accumulating our benefits. We can calculate the reduction in public and private health costs, both over some reasonable period of time. We can calculate the productivity value of increased lifespans and enhanced workplace productivity. And we can calculate the reduction in smoking-related casualties. You've heard of story after story of somebody falling asleep while smoking and burning themselves and their house and killing their children. There are all kinds of things that we can accumulate. So there's a lot of benefits. It's not just the increased health. There are also indirect benefits. We have a healthier environment. We have a much more desirable community. We have perhaps a much more appealing commercial sector or a restaurant district, because now people aren't smoking and people aren't avoiding this area because of smoking. We also we're going to have to add in some regulation and compliance and enforcement costs on the cost side, because it's an addictive substance and people are going to smoke it. People are going to grow it, and because it's illegal, people are going to sell it illegally. So it's a complicated process. But do you think over a reasonable period of time the benefits to society would exceed the cost? And of course the answer is yes. And we'll get to this in a case study down the road. The consequences of smoking are massive in this society. The costs are relatively low relative to the benefits to be received by eliminating. Now, whether that's a realistic scenario is another issue. But in terms of costs and benefits, I want you to remember the costs are the government's costs of implementing this program to regulate it, to enforce it, to engage in a buyout process, to not hurt the tobacco farmers too much. But the benefits are substantial. Now you might say, well, shouldn't we just pay off everybody? Shouldn't we make the manufacturers whole, and shouldn't we make the distributors whole? And the answer is no, we don't do that. When we find out or declare something is deadly or dangerous, we don't go and say to the asbestos manufacturer, oh, we're sorry, you're bad luck, we're going to compensate you. We say cease and desist. That's how we deal with that. So we issue a cease and desist kind of order on that kind of thing. Well, that's the kind of attitude you need for something like this. So in a nutshell, and let me wrap up, the historic methods of producing social welfare gains have come from incremental and timely investments by governments in public goods, bridges, roads, canals, navigation systems, and dams. they're all forms of public investments that are designed to produce or enhance welfare. The same can be said for vaccination and nutrition programs, screening children for disabilities, and other important preventive health and social programs, making people healthier, not just building them a bridge or making flood control, but making them healthier also has substantial benefits. Their gains that are counted are measured as producer, but mostly as consumer surpluses over some reasonable period of time. That time dimension is going to get developed in a little bit here in the next lectures. Okay, more than a nutshell. Simply stated, because of timely and strategic investment by my governments, that would be the case in public works construction or consumer safety activities, anything, but if we're doing it at the right time, consumers and producers realize reductions in the cost of obtaining necessary goods and services or in the cost of selling their labor. Me as a householder, my welfare becomes enhanced because my costs are lower, yielding higher incomes, greater price competitiveness, and a better market. And over a period of time, we have an enhanced market, and all of these benefits relative to these costs can be summed and calculated and put into a ratio that helps us make better decisions. We'll move into the activity of benefit cost determination in the next lecture. Look forward to seeing you then.